I wanted to come on this weekend, this Saturday, after a really traumatic week in, I think, American life. Um, where I grew up in Mississippi and across the South, Saturdays in September was always about football. And today, in an hour or so, there's an Ole Miss-Arkansas game, which in my household was always a very big event. When I was growing up in Mississippi, my father and I were lucky enough to really bond over going to Ole Miss football games together. We lived in Jackson, close enough to this stadium called Memorial Stadium, which is still there, where we could walk to games. And they had a lot of Ole Miss games at Memorial Stadium then. And I was thinking about this, of how lucky I was to have this ability to find a way to connect with my father where we could watch games and talk about everything and talk about nothing. When he turned 95, it was the year after the Romney campaign. We lost, by the way. Um, and I've been involved in presidential campaigns. You win and those you lose. And in my experience is when you lose, you end up thinking a lot more about in a reflective sense of what life means and what choices you've made. So that fall, 2013, my father and I and my mother, I decided that we would go to all the Ole Miss football games that season. And I ended up writing a book about it called The Last Season, A Father, Son, and a Lifetime of College Football. Uh, it was a great experience when I did it. I'm really glad I did. And that year, the quirk of the schedule with Ole Miss, there were 6 games back to back that were home games. So we ended up living in this funny little hotel there right on campus called the Inn at Ole Miss. We were there for like almost 7 weeks. And I spent a lot of time on the campus and a lot of time thinking about Ole Miss and about the South and about change and about civil rights. 1962 was the last year that Ole Miss won a national championship in football. It was also the year where arguably the last battle of the Civil War was fought in Oxford over the integration of Ole Miss. And that came in a September. On Saturday, there was a Ole Miss Kentucky game at Memorial Stadium in Jackson. I went to that game with my dad. And at the halftime, the governor of Mississippi, Ross Barnett, came out. They rolled out a podium and he gave this speech to this huge crowd that was basically a call for armed rebellion against the federal government, knowing that the federal government, under court order, U.S. Marshals were going to escort one African American named James Meredith into the University of Mississippi. And it was a really ugly scene at that game. I was really too young to realize it. Um, at the end, people were chanting, "The South shall rise again," sung Dixie. And my father took my hand and we left and we walked back home at halftime, which we never did. Win or lose, we always stayed to the end of games. And it was something that really disturbed him because he had been an FBI agent and he had seen a lot of, I think, the very dark side of civil rights and what it meant in the South. And that Sunday, after the game, all these students drove back to Oxford. And about this time, around 6 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon, huge crowd had gathered in the center of the Ole Miss campus, which is called the Grove, to protest the integration of Ole Miss, and turned into a riot. U.S. Marshals were attacked, some hurt very seriously. 2 people were killed, one a local resident who just happened to be at the wrong time at the wrong place, and another, a French journalist, was killed. And the next day, with federal marshals, they did integrate Ole Miss with James Meredith. But there was such unrest still that the president called out the National Guard. And within a week, there were 30,000 troops in this little town, Oxford, Mississippi, just to ensure that one person, an African American, could study at the university. And I was thinking about that because before every home game at Ole Miss now, there's this ritual where the team pulls up in the team bus and stops at the Grove, right in the heart of the campus, which is now heralded as the greatest pregame. We call it tailgating, except they don't allow cars, but it's pregame uh, spectacle in probably college American football. You can go on YouTube. You can see tons of articles are written about it. It's an extraordinary moment. So this team gets off the bus and they walk through the Grove to the stadium. And now, the Ole Miss team looks a lot more like Ole Miss. And I was thinking about, you see these kids, black and white, who were mobbed by these adoring fans walking through it. Where in 1962, a Pitt's battle was fought. They just stopped one black student from going to Ole Miss. And they walked past the monument to the Confederate soldiers at the end of the Grove, and they walk into the stadium. And I found this very moving and hopeful because it really wasn't that long ago. And there was a role that college football played in the South that I think is a lot like rugby played in South Africa. It was the first time that blacks and whites had a reason to cheer for each other. And of course, now the only time you'd have a riot over a African American student at Ole Miss is if maybe some like top football player committed to Ole Miss and then decommitted and decided not to go to Ole Miss. And Ole Miss is the most southern of this any university and probably the most southern state, Mississippi. And the whole ideology, iconography of Ole Miss was based around Confederacy. Colonel Reb was the mascot. The school band wore Confederate Army uniforms. We passed out that cheerleaders would throw bundled Confederate flags into the stadium. And this went on well into the 90s. And finally, there was a guy who was chancellor of Ole Miss named Eddie Kayak, who had played football at Ole Miss, then played football professionally, and then gone on to Yale. And he became chancellor. And he set about to try to change this culture, which, as you can imagine, is an extraordinarily emotional thing for a lot of people in the South, a lot of white people in the South who were attached to Ole Miss. And he was just, when I was growing up, at halftime, they would roll out on the field what they billed as the world's largest Confederate flag. It like filled almost half the field. And even then, I was young enough to remember wondering, like, what was the second largest Confederate flag? Like, how tough was this competition? But over a couple of years, and helped greatly behind the scenes, and also in front by the Manning family, Ole Miss got rid of its mascot. No longer is Colonel Reb. They got rid of the Confederate uniforms for the band. Which, when you think about it, I mean, like, see, me, half the band was black and they were wearing Confederate uniforms. I mean, it was just extraordinary. It's crazy. It had to change. Um, and Ole Miss went through a period of real soul searching, I think. And it's not like things are perfect there, but I think that the university, and to a certain degree, that part of Mississippi, deserves a lot of credit for at least asking a lot of tough questions and trying to change. And I think about that now when this horrible week that we had with all of this outpouring of emotions, just horrendous murder of Charlie Kirk and the ugliness that it brought out. And, I'm someone who's been very, very vocal about Trump and about what the Republican Party has become. And it's easy, I think, to sink into sort of a hopelessness about this. Like, how will this change? Will it ever change? And the answer is we don't know how it'll change. But I think that we don't have the right not to believe and hope that it will change. Because, you think about it, there is one group of Americans who, if any group had a right to lose faith in the American system, it's African Americans. They were enslaved, they were tortured, they were killed, they were raped, incredible legal hurdles, all to stop them from voting. And what did they do? They didn't storm the Capitol like this Trumpist insurrectionist. They worked harder, they registered voters, and they kept faith with a certain hope of what it means to be an American. And this is what I have, just one of the reasons I have so little, zero respect for these insurrectionists and these people who support Trump. They're overwhelmingly white. You think your election didn't go the way you want, and so you're out. You're going to take over in elections in America, storm the Capitol, try to kill the vice president. No. So I think that we can look at the changes that have occurred in the South and look at a place like Ole Miss and look at how the African American community kept faith and use it as our model and use it as an inspiration, and that we can get through this, and that there will be very, very dark times, but there still is an opportunity and a chance and a need and a hope that our better angels will emerge. So, with that, I hope everybody is able to spend some time thinking about what it means to be an American this weekend. Spend time with family and friends. Try to get offline. I say that while I'm online, so maybe that's a little ironic. Um, and remember just how fortunate we are to have this legacy of what it means to be an American. Thanks, and I hope Ole Miss beats the hell out of Arkansas. See you.